So my first Homelab video actually goes back to 2024, and since then quite a bit has changed around here. I've added a new Proxmox mode, upgraded my network to 10 gigabits, and added a new NAS into the setup. And everything in my setup was actually purchased with my own money, with the exception of the Zimaboard 2, which was sent over for review I did earlier this year. By the way, if you're new here and a fan of Homelab tech and tutorials and Raspberry Pis and NAS reviews, please consider subscribing, as I do have a lot of good videos coming up, including some NAS content. And with all of that out of the way, let's jump into my Homelab. Starting with my first Proxmox server, this is a Supermicro build I put together back in 2022. It's running a first generation Epyc 3251 SoC with 8 cores and 16 threads, along with 64 gigs of ECC RAM. It's also got 4 Ethernet ports and a dedicated IPMI port, which I use for troubleshooting. And this hypervisor originally handled all of my VMs and LXCs, but since adding the Zimaboard, it's become more of a testing ground where I can spin up VMs and containers and experiment with different setups without touching my main environment. And as a recommendation, it's always usually better to have separate environments, one for testing and one for your, you can call it production node, just so things don't get messed up. Over the past year, I added a Home Assistant VM along with a USB Zigbee hub, which I pass through to the VM. This lets me control my 7 studio lights, each connected to Zigbee smart plugs, using a single remote instead of having to switch them all on and off manually. I also set up an LXC container running Casa OS and installed Uptime Kuma so I can monitor all of my servers, both testing and always on servers. More recently, I spun up an LXC of Wordpress to build out my new Mackeytech website before pushing it live. Going forward, I'll likely move things like Home Assistant and Uptime Kuma over to the Zimaboard, since that's the system I want handling more of my always-on services. That brings me to the 4-bay Synology DS920 Plus, which used to be my main NAS. These days, it's primarily used for backing up my newer UGREEN NAS, which we'll get into in just a second. First, I wanted to discuss my networking, which is built around the Unifi UDM Pro and a 16-port PoE switch. This powers 5 Unifi G4 cameras and 2 access points, one of which is Wi-Fi 7, that I picked up last year. Now, when it came time to upgrade my NAS, I ended up going with UGREEN instead of Synology, and that really wasn't a decision I made lightly. I actually have an entire video on why I made the switch, which I'll link below, but the long and the short of it is that UGREEN offered significantly better specs for the money and was a much more open platform, which I really preferred. So I went with the UGREEN DXP 1600 Pro and loaded it up with 4 8-terabyte drives and a RAID 5 configuration. I also added a 1 terabyte NVMe drive for cache, which helps speed things up quite a bit. This unit comes with 8 gigabytes of RAM and 2 10 gigabit Ethernet ports, which is just killer. Right now, I'm using it primarily for streaming Jellyfin, along with Joplin running in a Docker container, mostly because I wanted to move away from subscription-based note services like Evernote and keep the data self-hosted. The UGREEN is also where I store all of my older YouTube footage, and more recently, I've actually started editing my videos directly off of it thanks to its fast networking. I also use it as a backup target for my Proxmox snapshots. Wanting to edit YouTube videos on the NAS was part of what led me to pick up this new 10 gigabit managed switch from QNAP. I specifically wanted something with at least 8 10 gigabit ports, and while I would have preferred to stay with the Unifi ecosystem, most of their options included PoE, which I didn't really need, and the whole RGB port thing felt very gimmicky to me. Another nice bonus with the QNAP switch is that it has multi-gig support, so it can handle 2.5 gig, 5 gig, 10 gig, and not just 1 and 10 gig. That brings me to the Zimaboard 2, which I'm currently using as a second Proxmox node. So now I have a small cluster. One of the many benefits of a Proxmox cluster is that you have a single interface to manage both nodes and don't need separate logins. This Zimaboard has 16 gigs of RAM, but a modest 64 gigabytes of onboard eMMC storage. So instead of using that, I'm running Proxmox off of a 256 gigabyte NVMe drive connected via the board's PCIe port. I've also got two SATA SSDs attached, which I'm using for ISO storage as well as running my VMs and LXCs. Given the RAM limitations, I'll probably lean more towards LXCs on this system. One of the first services I set up on the Zimaboard is Paperless, which is a digital document management system. And instead of digging through folder structures, you can tag and search your documents to quickly find what you need. It also has a mobile app, which makes it really easy to upload or scan documents on the fly. Next, I have an Ubuntu VM running a LAMP stack, which is Apache, MySQL, and PHPMyAdmin that I host internally to track my sales off of eBay. Right now, I'm using 4 gigabytes of RAM in the VM, but I'm considering moving it over to an LXC container to reduce overhead since containers are much more lightweight and don't really consume all the resources they're allocated. They only use what they need, so that'll be a little bit more efficient going forward. And lastly, I have a VM running Cachy OS, which I was testing for a video I did, but I'll likely be moving that back over to my testing Proxmox node. Now, since the Zimaboard doesn't have built-in IPMI, I added a JetKVM so I wouldn't have to troubleshoot while standing over my server rack. It's essentially an IP KVM with a web interface, so I can access the system at the hardware level even if the OS, being Proxmox in this case, isn't responding. I also wanted to mention this small firewall mini PC that I originally planned to use for Opnsense, but after running into some compatibility issues, I ended up repurposing it as an unmanaged switch in my office, and now it doubles as a Fedora machine I use pretty regularly. Going forward, I'm thinking about adding N8N to my Proxmox stack to help automate some of my contact workflow. It's basically a self-hosted automation tool, so instead of manually posting everything, I can have it handle things like pushing videos to socials or updating my WordPress site in the background so I don't have to do it all manually. Anyway, that is our Homelab tour for 2026. Nothing too crazy, but just enough for my purposes. If you're a newcomer to Homelabs and curious about how to get started, I did a video on some things to consider that I will leave in the video description. Also, if this video was helpful, please give us a like and click that subscribe button. A special shout out to Dom and my other Patreon supporters. I appreciate all of you do, and thank you for sticking with me. Thank you all for watching. We'll be talking to you again very soon.